Welcome to a Vox Markets investor webinar. This evening we have Avihu Tamir. He's the CEO and founder of Kanabo Group, an Israeli-based medicinal cannabis firm. He'll be taking us through the company's investor presentation first, before answering some questions at the end. Now he'll be doing this alongside Atul Devani, who's the CEO of the GP service. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, please use the comment box on the right and we'll try our best to get round to them. I'll now hand you over to Avihu and see you at the end. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Fran. I will jump into the presentation now and start really with an introduction of our new team members. As you all know, the Kanabo management and team, now we're getting a significant new strength in the technology side with Atul and Suleiman's experience. Atul is the CEO of GP Service. Atul, maybe you can speak a bit about your background.
Yes, thank you, Avihu. So my name is Atul Devani. I'm the CEO. Together with my colleague Suleiman, I guess we started the GP service back in 2015. We really came at it from introducing technology into the telemedicine space. So everything from being able to see a GP online, undertaking a prescription electronically, and then going to your nearest pharmacy in order to pick up that prescription. I look mainly after the sort of commercial side of the business, and Suleiman, my co-founder, looks after the technology side of the business.
So Kanabo from the beginning had this vision of focused on patients, patient-centric, and this across the board, from a research and development company started by building a unique device, unique formulation, and solutions for patients. And I think that now with the GP deal, we're just emphasizing the focus on patients even more, having a direct contact with patient, having this last mile. I believe this is going to be one of the major points of assets for the entire group. I would just want to take one slide to talk about the evolution of the cannabis market in the last year, and what we expected is now happening full scale across the board. The first thing that we expected, and we can see this happening now beyond just North America, is that cultivation is becoming a really commodity. Margins in this category is extremely low time in history for CBD. Cannabis is probably to be there by the end of the year, and the only ones that really can produce and generate profits and decent margins are the ones that have economy of scales. So capacity is the winning point for cultivation. In Europe, we're still in a process or in an era of investing in processing facility. EU GMP processing facility is still something that is a barrier to entry for many companies and products, specifically in Europe. Having said that, when we're looking at North America, when we're looking at Israel, the processing phase, producing the raw material of extracts and oils, is starting to become a commodity. And I believe that when we're looking into the future, we will see a decrease in price in the medical cannabis, similar to what we see in the last year with the CBD raw materials. But what's now obvious to everyone is that we're starting the era of patient customer focus. And in any industry, it's not a surprise, because in the end of the day, the ones that have the highest margins and usually the biggest exposure are the brands that have the relationship with the customer, patient, and this category is mainly innovation. How do we approach? What is the technology innovation? What is the hardware or the device or the medicine innovation that you're bringing to this last mile? And what's amazing is we see it happening in every market. So it already in the midst of the highs in North America, dispensaries and pharmacies are being bought for north than $100 million. In Israel, all of the cannabis companies are now buying physical pharmacies and starting to look into online pharmacies. And now we see this starting in Germany as well. With the GP, we will be the first ones that are approaching this innovation in patients focus era. Looking back on Kanabo, we listed on February 16 and signed distribution with the biggest distributor currently for medical cannabis in the UK. Built 2 production lines, one for medical cannabis with Pharmacan and another one for CBD products in the UK with Pure Origin. All of the SOPs, IP, and equipment is belong to Kanabo, and it's being operated as a service provider by Pharmacan. We had Daniel Poulter join us. It's an MP, former health minister, and really involved in guiding us through the regulation. Will be very much involved with the GP service as well. We launched the first product, meter dose cannabis vape in the UK in August this year. Started launching our wellness platform and products, and announced the first clinical trial in the world for a meter dose cannabis vape. Now, if we're looking at Kanabo, Kanabo was a product development company, delivery method, Israeli research center to bring new products and innovation, creating IP with 2 national phase patents at this point. We have a 1st generation device in the market, 2nd generation device coming in the future with additional technology and data collection. But now we did 2 deals of Materia and the GP service. We're talking about a seed to sale, production, and product to patient strategy, where Materia bringing us the processing facility and distribution in Germany, and the GP will add to the enlarged group the capability of prescribing, building a bigger market, and with unique assets of automated assessment platform where patient can go into the platform and get prescription without seeing a physician at all, in a vast reach, probably one of the biggest reach from private online healthcare providers for pharmacies across the UK. I'm going to look in this market and the 2 biggest challenges in the market right now in Europe. The first one is the limited amount or options that patients have when they want to consume cannabis. And the second one is safe access to patients. There's just insufficient access today for eligible patients for medical cannabis. Delivery method. We see still today that physicians are looking for products that are meter dose, that they're used to, products that usually will look like capsules or pills. And in the cannabis industry, all of the forms of, I would say, consuming cannabis orally are very, very challenging. And we see that what's happening is that patients are choosing to inhale the cannabis. And smoking cannabis, as we know, is challenging. Actually, smoking cannabis has more tar than smoking a cigarette. And there's no meter dose. And it's just almost impossible to convince a physician that this is a medical delivery method. And this is the disturbing image. The disturbing image is this market is today 70 to 80% still selling flowers, a majority for smoking. And it doesn't matter if we're looking at Germany, we're looking in the UK and Israel, across the board. This is the number one challenge, to really bring the medical establishment to understand that cannabis is a legitimate medicine. And the Kanabo solution is a meter dose medical device that brings specifically 1 milligram of every inhalation. So today with prescriptions, we see physicians prescribe a specific dose, 3 milligrams, 3 times a day, 3 milligrams as needed. And it's the same language that they use when we're prescribing medicine. The device is already a medical device in Israel, and in the last stage of receiving a full CE mark European medical device that will open not only the full European market for the device, but beyond that, a fast track to Canada, Australia, most countries in South America as well. In the same time, we didn't forget the patient. So the device is mimicking exactly this inhalation and smoking of cannabis without all the side effects, but still high bioavailability, a fast onset where a patient doesn't need to wait until he will have the effect. And this partnership is with two of the biggest players in the market. If we're looking at Jupiter, is the biggest developer for engineering company for these type of devices in the US, selling north of $100 million a year. And Smore Technology, by far the biggest manufacturer of devices for cannabis and beyond, electronic cigarettes as well, valued for $30 billion on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Both companies chose Kanabo as the cannabis partner and the exclusive distributor of the medical version. Kanabo is focusing on the medicine itself. So all of our patents are based on the formulations and the medicines. What you can see on the left is the first product we launched in the UK, specifically for chronic pain management. And we're expecting to bring additional product by the middle of the year for anxiety and PTSD. We see pain management and psychiatric indications as two of the biggest unmet needs today in the UK. Looking at the second biggest challenge, patients, insufficient access to patients, exactly. I want to focus on the UK market because for me, the UK market is the sleeping giant when we're talking about medical cannabis. Because the market today has the full regulation in place. One of the interesting things that the regulator in the UK did, they did not create a new category for medical cannabis, similar to Germany, similar to Israel, and many other countries. In the UK, cannabis is falling under unlicensed medicine and controlled substance. That means that prescribing medical cannabis is something that is already in the medical establishment regulation. But in the same time, we see that the amount of patients that using medical cannabis today in the UK is still small compared to the population side. We're talking about roughly 10 to 11,000 patients. And the reasons are these three challenges. The first one is NHS is not prescribing, or physicians from the NHS. Probably 5 or 6 patients, I think all of them are patients for epilepsy, have prescriptions from the NHS. All of the other 10,000 are private prescriptions. The second one is bureaucratic hurdle. In order to get a specialist to prescribe medical cannabis, the patient needs to bring his NHS records from surgery or the GP and pass it to the specialist. This is a hurdle. This is a process that can take weeks. I heard from some patients, even months. And obviously, this affects the last challenge of the lack of physicians that are supporting or feeling comfortable in prescribing cannabis. Maybe it's because the NHS is not supporting it. Maybe it's because it's just complex and takes time and it's not worth for them. And all of these together creates a challenge in this market. But in the same time, when we're looking at the medical cannabis clinic and the numbers from the clinic, the UK market is extremely interesting with a huge potential. First of all, 300% year-by-year growth. That means that probably the fastest growing medical cannabis market in the world right now, expected to grow double in percentage this year. The average expense of a cannabis patient in the UK is the highest in any other market. We're talking about £200 a month. And in the same time, although it's extremely expensive and doesn't have a lot of options for products, we see retention rates of above 80% month by month for patients repeatedly coming back and buying their medicine. I will ask Atul to jump in and tell us about the solution.
Thanks very much, Avihu. First of all, Avihu, again, just to sort of reiterate, we're really pleased to become part of the Kanabo group. I guess when we first started talking to Kanabo, we liked their approach to innovation, and in particular focusing in on the patient, because that's really how we started the GP service. There were and are a number of telehealth providers in the UK, so how we differentiated ourselves was really key. One of the things that we've managed to do is to increase positive outcomes for patients, and we've done that by accessing NHS summary care records as part of the consultation. So our GPs in real time, with the consent of the patient, can actually see the patient's record and therefore are much more confident in prescribing for the conditions that the patient presents. In addition to that, we kind of wanted to take that whole end-to-end journey. So from the time a patient sees a GP to the time they pick up the prescription, many providers will do the consult and then pretty much cut off at that point. We wanted to actually maintain the whole journey. So we also have built an electronic prescription system, which means that when the consultation's finished and the GP's completed their notes, when they press the button, that prescription arrives electronically into the pharmacy. And we now have over 4,000 pharmacies, including some of the high street names, as well as independent pharmacies. So we've managed to kind of provide that whole end-to-end journey. So our platform, if you like, really we're looking to leverage now and grow into other services. So this will allow us to, expand into Europe and really become one of the first sort of digital providers that can look at additional services like cannabis and general health right across Europe. If we go to the next slide. I think looking further than cannabis and looking really at the telemedicine market for the future, there are a number of areas that we already are starting to progress into. So today we already offer the service as a corporate service to employees. So an employer can come to us and say, we want the ability for our staff to be able to see a doctor straight away if they don't feel well. We want to be able to do that, not just as a sort of service from the GP service, but maybe perhaps provide that as a fully white labeled version for themselves. So we already do that. We have corporate customers that are live using the service, and employees can see a GP, normally within sort of 30 minutes from wanting to go online and book a consultation. Those prescriptions are already sent electronically, and we're looking at expanding these services. So any healthcare provider that is requiring a private prescription to be sent can log on to our platform and use it to send a private prescription. We also have a form assessment service, as Avihu mentioned, where for certain treatments, patients are able to go online, they're able to complete a questionnaire. Those questionnaires are designed by our doctors effectively to then ask all of the relevant questions in relation to that medication. And once you get to the end of that form and submit it, they're presented to our doctors effectively to sign off as a prescription. So again, it's another service that we are already offering, and we're looking to expand the number of treatments that are available on there. I guess the final sort of stamp of approval, if you like, on our technology is that the NHS itself has been tendering for providers to offer their technology to be used within the NHS. And last year they issued a new framework, which was for digital video and online consultations. And we were approved as a supplier on that framework, which allows us now to go in and also offer that technology into NHS organizations.
Thank you, Atul. To really sum it up, we're building here the Europe largest public cannabis company, and with several unique assets. If it's assets that are really have high barrier to entry, if it's the IP around the medical device, if it's the unique platform with NHS approval. This merger is bringing us to two very interesting markets. The biggest European cannabis market right now in Germany, entering distribution in Germany, and the UK cannabis market that we expecting going to be a very significant market in Europe. Just to talk a bit about numbers, usually you see 1% of population eligible for medical cannabis. In Israel, this is already 1.5%. If you're looking on the UK population, so we're talking about roughly 1 million patients and is a potential market. Currently, we're talking about a market where £200 a month investment of a patient. That means a market of £200 million a month size. So that's a very, very significant medical cannabis market. And I think more than anything else, we're becoming a cannabis and telehealth company. It's a company that has scalability like a technology company, but in a very lucrative market of medical cannabis, that it's one of the fastest markets growing in the world right now. And to sum it up, we're talking about one of the fastest growing segments. As I mentioned, high barrier to entry, both in the medical device and NHS approved telehealth, reoccurring revenue, both on the model of the device and medicine repeatedly being bought on a monthly basis, and the meeting with physicians and prescriptions, that is a revenue model. Highest margin, we're not focusing like many of the other cannabis companies on cultivation with big investments on CapEx, with the high risk of agriculture, and really focusing on the last mile where we know that margins are high and margins are staying for the longer duration of time. Building a pan-European distribution and sales network to really become the leading online and medical cannabis player in Europe, and management that has experience in cannabis, pharma, and now technology as well. Thank you very much. If there's any questions.
Thanks, Avihu, for that great presentation. I'm now joined with Avihu and Atul Devani, who's the CEO of the GP service. Thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thank you, Fran.
We've had plenty of questions come in from the investor community, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. Just to start, the medicinal cannabis industry is very much still within its nascency, particularly here in the UK, with legalization obviously only having occurred a few years ago. So Avihu, just to start, how would you characterize the industry now in 2022?
I think what's amazing with cannabis is that it's like we all have already the crystal ball. We don't need to imagine what will happen. We know exactly what will happen because we can look on the other side of the pond and understand that what happened in North America, what is happening in Israel right now, what we see is starting to happen in Germany is exactly what's going to happen in the UK. Almost all of the markets have the same stages or phases, just different time frame. UK is now, I would say, in the second phase. We passed the pains of the first 2 years, and we see that now there is already a significant pool of patients. There's the notion and understanding that medical cannabis is helpful, and we all understand that the problem is that we need more safe access, and that patients that are eligible for medical cannabis will have the opportunity. It is really the second phase. And the third phase will be when we see this group of around 10, 11,000 patients today, reaching 50 to 100,000 patients. And this should happen in a matter of 18 to 20 months, I'm expecting. And when we hit this point, it's suddenly a very significant patient community. And NHS cannot ignore anymore this size of a patient community. And we will see the NHS joining. I don't know yet how, but this is something that will happen somewhere next year, if I estimate it.
And it seems the company's really made use of in the UK. You described last year as a breakthrough year for the company. So just looking at that later part of the year, you started a first of its kind clinical trial in Israel in October. What is the significance of this trial, and what will a good outcome mean for the company?
This clinical trial is the first time anyone in the world will see a clinical data with bioavailability indicators for consuming cannabis via inhalation in a vape device, meter dose vape device. That will start the discussion, like what we saw happening with electronic cigarettes versus cigarettes. It will start similar discussion when we're talking about inhaling smoke. That's sadly, as I said in the presentation, still the number one delivery method, and moving to a medical device, meter dose vape. And you need this clinical data, although from a regulated point of view, it's not a requirement in unlicensed medicine. You need this to get the medical establishment on board, to make it a default and the gold standard of the industry. Part of our industry and strategy is really to go and to get in as many clinical trials as possible. That means that in many opportunities, we're going to volunteer and provide both devices and formulations, no cost for the research, under the strategy of becoming the golden standard for the industry.
And so do you think it's safe to say then that by acquiring this data, the UK can then usher into what you call the third phase?
I think this will be one of the key tools. Another very important is to have a reputable healthcare provider like the GP service, and that already part of the medical establishment. We need to move from cannabis as the maybe the medicine, to start looking at people through indications. So pain management, chronic pain, MS, and then see if cannabis is the right medicine for them.
Right, of course. Now, before we move on to talking about the GP service and the collaboration between you two, let's just talk about Kanabo for a minute. How would you differentiate Kanabo in relation to its listed peers in this market? Obviously, there's been an influx of listed companies over the last year.
I think if we're looking in the LSE, if I'm not wrong, there's only 3 other cannabis companies right now. One of them is a synthetic CBD company. It's not a cannabis company. It's not a hemp company. It's a synthetic cosmetic company. Another one is a company that focuses on research and development of cannabinoids. This is a biotech pharmaceutical maybe company that is very binary. They will succeed, it's great. They won't succeed, we'll go to zero. And I think that Kanabo is the only real medicinal cannabis player in this market for now. Our strategy is to deliver medical cannabis from products that we already have today. We will develop and launch additional products, but everything from product and from medicine is existing in the market, and to reach as many patients as possible in the upcoming year. So sales revenue is a real target that we will see by the end of this year. And obviously, with the GP service, we're going to have a bigger outreach, and probably, I would guess, by the end of the year, maybe the biggest pool of patients as well. So that's a big difference.
Now, you've probably answered this question already, but when we're looking at the current landscape for listed companies, cannabis stocks, their share prices seem to be trading about 50% down from the highs over the last year. Why do you think this is exactly?
There's some that even lower than 50. I would say, first of all, it's people are saying it's a good opportunity when the stock is low, not advised to invest. And I think it's three main points. The first one, there's always an excitement in the beginning when there's a first off. And we saw it in many stocks. It's not unique to cannabis. The first cannabis stocks really get all this excitement. The second is the expectation that the market maybe will open very quickly. I met people that assume that the first year you will have full adult use market in the UK, and that's not the case. The market will develop, but it's not happening in one night. I think that now we can see that the puzzle are coming together. And the GP is the first acquisition for the enlarged group. Now as an enlarged group, we're definitely looking at additional pieces, strategic pieces for this puzzle. And this puzzle will give us a strategy for creating long-term value for investors. We're not playing in this short-term strategy, but creating a real company, a pan-European company that will last for many years.
Now, Kanabo is focused on two of the fastest growing segments of the industry, as you say. How do you see the industry evolving in terms of, do you anticipate any long-term growth in other areas, or how will you anticipate this as well?
First of all, if I'm looking at the delivery method, we see that across the board, even in territories like North America, like the US, where it's a very competitive landscape and it's beyond just medical cannabis, it's really adult use of cannabis. The segment of vaporization of cannabis is the second biggest segment after the sales of flowers. And is the same size of all products together. So there's no question that this segment of vaporization is probably the most resilient one, including even when there were challenges in 2019 with black market products. So very, very resilient category. And the second thing is retail. We see a shift across the board for retail. We see that most of the investments right now is going to retail. The understanding is that cultivation is becoming a commodity. Supply chain will evolve with time, and probably in the next 2 years, supply chain will be like any other industry. And the winners will be the ones that have this relationship with patients, have the capability to create a brand, and to have an open discussion with patients, to understand the needs of the patients. That's, for me, the key. And that's why it's a big game changer to have the GP service in the UK supporting the strategy.
Now, just before, one last question before we touch on the GP service, but you mentioned towards the end of your presentation your recent fundraising. Of course, we know that you're fully funded for the next year and a half, but how will you use these funds exactly?
So this raise, majority will go directly to the operation of the GP. First of all, supporting marketing. There's a very exciting pipeline that maybe Atul will touch a bit, but we can't expose everything at this point. A very exciting pipeline of the GP disconnected from medical cannabis. And I believe that this fundraising will really accelerate the GP core business. The second thing we're looking on the marketing bit and launching the medical cannabis part of the platform. Third, will be some additional level of unorganic growth, I will say, really to give us the maximum outreach in the UK and beyond.
That's great. Now, of course, in your presentation, you address the sorts of challenges to building a presence here in the UK. These include no NHS.
I think that Fran is frozen.
But elaborate on the rationale behind the acquisition.
Fran, we lost you for a minute there.
So sorry, I'll restart that again. I think I just dropped out the Wi-Fi, apologies. So in your presentation, you address the sort of challenges towards building a presence here in the UK that is within the medicinal, but also the wellness markets, and the two sort of intersect. So that includes no NHS route, hesitancy or lack of confidence from physicians to prescribe cannabis. So it really seems that the acquisition of the GP service seeks to address all of these issues. Atul, also jump in here. You two can sort of share the answers to these questions. Firstly, can you just elaborate on the rationale behind the acquisition, and perhaps give some context as well, just beyond cannabis, of how these two industries intersect?
Yeah, so perhaps if I take that one initially, Avihu. I think first and foremost, if you look at the GP service, we are an online telemedicine provider for primary care. So we've, over the last sort of 5 years, built what we regard to be one of the best-in-class technologies in the industry. Rather than just come at it and say we're a telemedicine provider, we provide online video consultations. We've kind of taken a step back and said, what is the patient journey, and how do you go from wanting to see a GP online to having your diagnosis undertaken by the GP, and then ultimately having a resolution to that. And there are several steps that have to occur in that process. So getting to see the GP, one can use a booking system if you wanted to have a video consultation, but that's not enough. What we did was to build technology that actually managed the entire process. So our systems, for example, have been built to guide the GP through a series of processes and questions and mandatory questions that they have to ask. The notes are taken formally as part of the consultation. And then even when you've been through all of that process, and for example, a prescription is generated, we've electronically connected pharmacies across the UK directly to our system, so those prescriptions can arrive instantly inside the pharmacy. So if you kind of walk through that process of what is required in order to do a consultation, we've kind of built that technology all the way through. And when we've done that pretty much in full compliance with regulations, we've not taken any shortcuts, we've built a solid system. And I think what we're doing now is to say, okay, we've got this platform, and bear in mind, we've taken this platform not just for the GP service, but we've white labeled it for a number of providers with our GPs effectively working on the back end of that to provide those services. So our ability to roll this technology out for other applications is where I think we saw, the collaboration between the two companies. And as Avihu alluded right at the beginning, it's about having a process whereby we're looking at the conditions for the patients. We're putting the patient first. We're looking what their issues are. If that requires additional medication for pain management, or they have MS and a controlled drug is required as part of that sort of pain management process, that's where we're expanding out into things like cannabis. The current system is already live. We even have corporate customers as part of that process. So there are many areas in which we can now collaborate as well as roll out new services. And for us, it was about having a partner that recognized that and would support us in that. And I think that's really, where the alliance between the two will help us to accelerate very quickly.
And just so we can understand this landscape, of course, COVID will have accentuated the need for this. Whether, no matter how COVID pans out, whether it's more intense or there are more restrictions, do you see this, I'm assuming, as something that's going to stick around?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you go back pre-COVID, when we originally launched a service, we started off delivering electronic prescriptions, so on a form basis, so people could, for example, fill out a questionnaire for a particular medication. They wouldn't need to see a GP, and provided the answers were, within what the GP was expecting, they were able to then prescribe, and the prescription would arrive electronically. When we added the video part of that, we even had the NHS and GPs telling us, look, video for consultations won't work. And then all of a sudden, COVID happens. The NHS, goes from 1% use of video to 71% use of video. And all of a sudden, it's become the norm to be able to have a consultation for telemedicine. But if you look back at that and you kind of try to deal with how do you make that the best service possible, I guess we took one step further than some of our competitors, because what we did was we looked at, what were the positive outcomes. So if you or I were to go and see a GP for a common condition, 60-65% of those common conditions would be dealt with by the GP on a telemedicine call. So we sort of took a long, hard look at that and said, well, okay, but how do we go from 60-65% to 80-85 or even 90%? And the answer was that we needed more information about the patient. So we actually worked with the NHS to have access to patient medical records. So our GPs, for example, can look at the summary care record during a consultation, obviously with the patient's consent, and they can see immediately, the current sort of conditions that patient might have, any medications that they're on. And that changes the way in which the GP is able to respond to that particular consultation in terms of a more positive outcome, because they're confident that they don't just have to rely on the information that the patient is telling them. They can actually go and look at the medical record. And, sometimes if somebody forgets that they're allergic to penicillin, but it's on the medical record, that can be dealt with as part of that consultation. So we took that even further in that process, which I think makes us fairly unique. And when you combine that with, trying to offer additional services, I think that that's a truly unique position to be in.
And it's that particular part of the GP service which seems to be addressing the challenge in the medicinal cannabis space, right? Of this kind of, as you said, bureaucratic hurdle. Is that fair to say of you?
Yeah. I think Atul can answer this as well, but it's extremely unique because you need the connection to the NHS. You need a reputable provider, but in the same time, you need to have access to private physicians. As we know, at this point, NHS physicians are not prescribing, GPs are not prescribing yet, and really you need this two combination overlap to be able to be a proper online provider for medical cannabis. Obviously this is one of the key assets that the GP has. Both of them, I don't know if there are any other telehealth provider that has this right now in the UK.
And how do you see this alongside where regulation is going? And do you think this can, partnerships like this can even inform regulation in the future? What's your take on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you look at the NHS itself is wanting to try to expand its services, in the telemedicine space. Last year, they issued a tender for online video and online consultation, so form and video-based services. We responded to that tender along with other suppliers, and we've been selected as one of the parties whose technology is approved to be able to be installed in the NHS. So I think the NHS, recognizes that sometimes it's quicker to look at private industry to bring in technology rather than try to create it itself. And there are many people out there that have got this knowledge of being able to create systems quickly and efficiently and safely. And we went through a very, very rigorous process in order to be approved for that framework. So I think that in itself endorses how good a piece of technology and services that we've built. So I think, it will take time for the NHS to come on board, for certainly controlled drugs and prescriptions to be able to be dealt with under a platform like this. But they've already made the first moves in terms of implementing these type of platforms. If you combine that with the fact that, today, as Avihu said, most prescriptions for cannabis, for example, are private prescriptions. Having the ability to produce private prescriptions, but electronically have them sent to the pharmacy, again, I think is quite a unique position to be in. So we believe that the platform is in a very strong position to then grow and be rolled out across numerous applications in the future.
And can you say at all when you expect to start prescribing cannabis across the platform, or the kind of strategic plan that might be in place to enable this?
Yeah, so I think it's too early to sort of just give you a date, but if you look at the processes that are involved. So firstly, I guess right at the beginning, when I started answering a couple of your questions, I said, we've built this effectively in full compliance with regulation. So there are still some more regulation pieces to get through, which we've already started. We already know what's required, but we're not taking any shortcuts in that process. So we will make sure that the service we launched is in full compliance with all the regulatory requirements. But one can say it's not years, it's months. So I think that's the sort of timeframes we're looking at.
That's great. And how do you both view the potential scale of this combined entity? And that's both in terms of cannabis, of course, but also beyond that, as we were talking about.
So if I talk about the beyond piece, if you like, and Avihu, you can come back onto the cannabis side of things. Our technology effectively is already being used in several different applications. We've fully white labeled it. We provide it to a high street pharmacy chain to use. We've been providing it to corporate customers to use, as well as having a situation where users can just come onto the platform and ad hoc get a consultation for a primary care issue. We know that we can lift that and apply it to other territories. So we can take it to other places in Europe. We can take it to other locations. Moving on even further and adding services to that for interpreting test results for bloods or referring to secondary care, all of these are in our roadmap in terms of being able to offer additional services. So there's a huge market for us that we can go into, and it's going to be a question of making sure we prioritize the right things in conjunction with Kanabo to get the best results.
Great. And Avihu, if you'd like to touch on the potential scale in terms of cannabis, that'd be great.
I think that if you're looking at the cannabis industry, if you're looking in other markets, again, you see that this strategy of prescription connected with the capability to distribute and dispense as well in the future is becoming the most strategic, most valuable part of the supply chain. And we see it in Germany now. Germany is already a significant market. I think the market right now is passing the 300 million euros a year. And you see a shift of margin to the last mile, to the bit of dispensing and prescribing. And online, if we're talking about this, well, it's not different than what Atul said. It's more convenient. It makes sense. Post-COVID, I think the world moved to technology and online, and in many cases, it doesn't make sense anymore to go to the physician to meet him face to face. And usually, for prescriptions of medical cannabis, online consultancy should be sufficient, and delivery of cannabis or the medicine and directly to the patient's home will cut costs. And one of the biggest pain, I think, in the UK market right now is that there's so many hands on the way. You have the delivery, you have the importer, you have the prescriber. that's why, in the end of the day, patients are screaming and saying, well, we're paying more than products in the black market. And you don't need all these hands. And with our strategy, the idea is to really find the right strategy to reduce these prices and to make cannabis accessible. When we say accessible, it's not only to be able to get the prescription and get the education, it's to have a product that people can literally afford.
That's great. Now, of course, this acquisition was only announced this week, but can you say anything for your longer term plans for this alliance, if there are any?
I think that, and we gave enough hints, I think, but the beat of Beyond Cannabis is a key strategy for the team. I think we will see the company approaching now additional products that are technology products, being able to bring it to corporate, as Atul said, clients and other solutions. I believe that we will see the platform going beyond just the UK and supporting the pan-European strategy of the enlarged group. And I think that we will see a pivotal year for medicinal cannabis in the UK.
That's great. Well, Atul and Avihu, thank you so much for your thoughts and your great presentation. We've managed to cover a lot and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.